We're taking a first look at the Super Bowl showdown slates, DraftKings, FanDuel, Yahoo, Fantasy Draft, Super Draft, you name it. We are on top of it. We're going to talk about lineup construction, about how, oh my God, what's going on there? How to approach building winning lineups to avoid duplication, all this good stuff. Ben, what's going on?
Not much. Yeah, we're getting to it. Golf locked. That was my basically last hurdle before I can really shift into Super Bowl mode. And now we're good to go. So, I mean, I know you know this, Nolan. We're going to say this a bunch. We've got big things coming tomorrow. We're going to break it down in full, but we wanted to hop on, give our first thoughts on the showdown slate because there's a ton of money up for grabs.
That is correct. We have a big show tomorrow. We are going to do a 3-hour Super Bowl special talking about just the general game breakdown. We're going to talk about DFS. We're going to talk about betting, favorite props, team props, fun props. It's going to be 3 straight hours of a live feed with all sorts of guests, including Sal Vetri, Alex Baker. You're hosting with Dave Laffey. It looks like we are not live right now. Are we going on YouTube? I don't see anything yet.
Yo no say, but I was in a groove too. Hopefully we are. Who knows?
Well, we'll just keep going in case we are. But yeah, it's going to be a great show, man. I'm really looking forward to watching it and just kind of delving into the Super Bowl here. Let's talk a little bit about this slate, though. What's your first takeaway from San Fran KC? It looks like it's going to be a bit of a high scorer. How are you kind of generally approaching things?
So, one of the things that is, I don't want to say it's atypical long term, but we've had a string of Super Bowls where there's been a clear favorite. And that influences everything from DFS to props to the lines. This is a straight toss up. There's a slight, 1-point favorite or whatnot. But that was my first thought, is it's just really evaluating a much more even game on the surface, and that affects everything.
I do not think we are live, Ben.
Okay. Oh, no, we got to see. My man Dante in chat says we are live in Slack. So
in what?
In Slack, in the NFL channel, they say we are live.
What is going on here? Why isn't it working for me?
Well, we'll do it live. Right. Yeah, I mean, what do you make of a spread like this, though? Like I said, it's a virtual pick'em. Does that influence kind of on a macro level how you approach things, or is it just another game?
Yeah, sorry. I guess I was on the wrong link there. Apologies, everyone. So, yeah, I guess like what I'm just doing a little bit of research and kind of looking into some showdown slates that have that we've seen so far this year. And I think in these virtual pick'ems and in these high scoring games, it makes logical sense. You're more likely to see offensive skill position players in your top 6. So what I'm going to be doing is focusing on getting the usual suspects in my lineups, the Travis Kelce's, the Tyreek Hills, and then kind of differentiating around those. And I think you have a pretty centralized offense from Kansas City. We kind of know where the ball is going, with a couple of exceptions on flyers like Demarcus Robinson and Mecole Hardman. And then from the 49ers side, I think there are a lot of different ways that you can approach this to kind of gain leverage on your opponents if you're pairing them with a more traditional Kansas City stack. There are a lot of different ways that San Francisco can beat you, and they have a lot of different weapons. And so that's kind of how I'm approaching things. I think people are going to have maybe a little bit of recency bias with the Mostert game, and maybe think that the 49ers are going to be running the ball down the Kansas City Chiefs' throats. Certainly makes a lot of sense because Kansas City's run defense has been atrocious this year. At the same time, I think that I was listening to Warren Sharp the other day talk about that 49ers demolition of the Packers, and his opinion was that the 49ers could have destroyed them via the pass too. Like there were openings. It's just that it was easier to do it via the run and put a little bit less stress on the defense. So what about yourself? How do you approach close games like this as opposed to in a higher total games, as opposed to like maybe a different game script?
So I think the first thing, and we're going to dig into this more in depth, but ownership is more dispersed because there's not an obvious where it's like one of these teams' implied totals is like 12 points or something. These are two teams that they do it in very different ways, but they can put up points. Now, of course, we have Mahomes, who is by far the most polarizing option, and it makes sense that even in a close game that Kansas City dominates the pricing. I don't think we're surprised at that. They have such a high-powered offense. Kansas City, the Niners have the luxury of having such a stout defense. They rely on the running game, and we know this. Jimmy G threw 8 times in a game, and they won going away. So it's interesting. I will say it kind of reminds me, when we always have the Patriots, sadly, it's usually in this game on showdowns and they have so many running backs. The Niners are kind of like that with Mostert, Kevin Coleman. We'll see how healthy he is. And then you have Breida. I'm sure people, and I think this is totally fine, are going to pair a couple of those guys up and hope that the Niners replicate what they did against Green Bay and maybe dominate up front and with the running game.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. I'm just looking. Looks like our projections are out over at awesemo.com. Also, before we get too far into it, I just want to thank our sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. They are one of the best sites out there. If you haven't been playing over on Yahoo Daily Fantasy, the competition's a little softer. They have CSV uploads. They have all kinds of different contests. Their NBA and NHL contests are getting bigger by the day. So if you haven't been playing over on Yahoo, make sure to go check that out. So getting back to things here, it looks to me like we are going to see some over ownership in some spots and some under ownerships in other spots, just like usual weeks. One thing that really stands out to me, and maybe we can talk about the quarterbacks from each team. It looks like Patrick Mahomes is going under owned in the captain spot, according to our first ownership projections. We have him about a 25% chance of being the top quarterback on the slate, or top player on the slate, I should say, and only about a 15% chance of only 15% ownership. Of course, his dollar per point is going to be a little bit higher because he's one of the most expensive players on the slate, or the most expensive player on the slate, I should say. What are you doing with Mahomes? And then, of course, Jimmy Garoppolo as well, who's the reverse, getting. This is really strange to me. He's getting too much ownership compared to our projections of him being the top captain spot. We have about a 5% chance of being the top play, 12% ownership. I thought that would be reversed because of the recency bias over him throwing just 8 balls against the Packers.
Yeah, I did too, to an extent, but maybe people, I don't want to say overreact the other way, but maybe they see that, that was an atypical game script, even for a team that wants to run the ball. I do like Jimmy G. Now, if ownership is dictating, too much, I'm going to have to reevaluate that. As you talked about, yes, they ran it down their throat. It wasn't needed. But Jimmy G, in his defense, has shown when they need to throw, he's pretty capable. He has weapons. He's got Debo. He's got Emmanuel Sanders, obviously George Kittle. It's not a team that is one-dimensional in the sense if they fall behind, they can't move the ball. It's just, I think we all know they would rather control the game on the ground and with the defense. So if you think the narrative is that Kansas City can either limit, that rushing attack, or that Mahomes can move the ball and force them to open it up, I definitely get the merit for looking to the Niners pass catchers and thus Jimmy J.
Okay, I got a stat for you. I'm going to throw out. Last 2 games, 8 of the top 9 players in routes run play for the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the Chiefs, it's strength on strength in this game in that sense, where we know, you can say the Niners defense is, and it's true, by far the best unit. Certainly Kansas City has seen. And on the flip side, I'm not sure the Niners have seen many attacks like this. So how that will play out, that's what we're trying to infer. Mahomes is going to be an incredibly popular captain. Now he's incredibly expensive, especially on DraftKings where the multiplier comes into play. It's going to just be, can you differentiate if you put him at captain? I'm not sure you really can.
Yeah, going to be very hard. So let's talk a little bit about some of these differentiation points. I think the pass catchers on the Kansas City side are pretty clear. We have Tyreek Hill, we have Sammy Watkins, we have Travis Kelce, and then of course we have a few different options that are going to be a little less chalky, but still some degree of chalkiness. Damian Williams has been running the 4th most routes these playoffs for the Chiefs. Demarcus Robinson getting a little bit of red zone action and also running a fair amount of routes, getting about half the ownership of Mecole Hardman. And of course, Mecole Hardman. And then probably the only real flyer that you could go to, I guess, would be Blake Bell, who does get a decent snap count, but doesn't run a lot of routes. So is there anyone in there that you prefer? Let's maybe talk about the top options here in Tyreek Hill, Sammy Watkins, and Travis Kelce. Do you have a strong lean for which one of those guys you're going to pair up with Mahomes, or is it simply a case of mix and match?
I mean, certainly if you're building a multitude of teams, you're going to want to mix and match when you're playing Mahomes. You're going to want to use as many weapons as possible. Certainly, you're going to hope he scrambles a bit just to get the points to himself. That's really important. He's been doing that. Of course, against the Titans. He had that ridiculous run. Tyreek is able to do, I know he's a burner. I know he's kind of always a boom bust, but Andy Reid does such a good job of getting him in space, of being creative. I wouldn't be stunned to see him have a couple carries, a couple of those pop passes. Those are the things that really help. The Niners are going to try to key on him and Kelsey, as all teams do. Just kind of a pick your poison. So I think Tyreek would be my preferred option. I just don't know how feasible it is to pair up Mahomes and Tyreek. You are absolutely funneled if you do that. You have basically minimal salary left for 4 spots.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just going through a lot of the showdown slates from this year, and thus far I'm about 3/4 of the way through, and I don't have a single tight end in the captain spot. That obviously that's maybe a little bit surprising. It's not the biggest sample size in the world, but I'm more likely to put Tyreek Hill in that captain spot. I'm also more likely to, I think, pair him up with Mahomes, just because I think the upside is there for GPPs. But I think your points stand as well. What about some of these lesser owned guys that we might have to take flyers on in order to get some cost savings and differentiate? Do you have a favorite between Demarcus Robinson and Mecole Hardman? Or do you like anyone else like way down there? Maybe, I don't know, on the off chance Anthony Sherman can find his way into the end zone, or Blake Bell. I think Blake Bell is actually a little bit interesting at his price point, and given the fact that he's probably not going to carry much ownership, and he allows you to get some of these higher priced guys into your lineup.
Yeah, the Bulldozer. He was a great college player. I mean,
former 49er too.
There you go. Look at that revenge narrative. That's all we need.
Right.
I mean, these are going to be guys that are going to probably be overowned relative to Mahomes correlation, in the sense that when you play Mahomes, your first thought is, let me get some cheap Chiefs exposure. And guys like Hardman, who's so explosive, Robinson's out there a good amount, not going to be overly involved. I totally get it. My first thought, and I think this again, I'm not going to push it because it really hasn't been working, is, man, maybe I can get some backfield exposure to someone other than Damian Williams, and that has just not been the case. The Chiefs have decided to run a full-out stranglehold. LaShawn McCoy wasn't even suited up. Darwin Thompson, minimal impact. So that's really where I keep trying to think maybe you can get creative. But right now, the Chiefs are playing it as straight up as you can be, and he is dominating the backfield.
Yeah, let's take a look here. I just had their snap counts pulled up, but it's basically like, and I don't really see any reason why they would go away from that, right? Like, there was a narrative a little bit earlier on that maybe they were saving with Shady McCoy for the playoffs, but it looks like Darwin Thompson's basically taken that second lead. So we have him like 58 offensive snaps for Damian Williams, just 11 for Darwin Thompson. Do you have any interest in Thompson at all?
I mean, listen, if you're playing in something that's massive, maybe just a sliver, you hope he gets like 4 touches and one of them happens to go for a touchdown. That's literally what you're drawing to. But you're right. The narrative coming into the playoffs, I thought that we would see more dynamic plays from the backfield in the sense of different guys. Now, Damian Williams has been fantastic. He's scoring touchdowns left and right. But right now it's hard to really go anywhere else because you're drawing to just a limited volume if you get lucky. I mean, your guy could be a healthy scratch and see 0 work.
Yeah, exactly right. There's very few game scripts, I think, where Darwin Thompson is on that winning lineup. One of them would be just an absolute blowout of the 49ers, which I don't think we're going to see.
You're truly best out, and I don't think you should build to this ever, would be Damian Williams getting hurt.
That's a good point. And we've actually seen that in a Chiefs game earlier this season against the Denver Broncos when Pat Mahomes went out and some fish won all the money with Kelsey, Tyreek Hill, and no correlation.
Quarterback. So. Yeah, I mean, crazy stuff happens. I don't think you want to be planning for that, but you're going to need some fluky thing to get Darwin Thompson more than a handful of touches. That's for sure.
For sure. Okay, I got 2 more questions for you here. Byron Pringle just seems to be a non-factor now. He did play a little bit in their Week 19 matchup. Do you have any interest in him at all?
I don't. One, as you mentioned, the obvious thing is he's basically a non-factor. 2, and I think this I don't want to say it's a major thing, but I think it's worth saying. He was on a showdown slate as a nobody, exploded, and ended up being, a guy way back in Week 5 at the Colts. I do think that he gets more name recognition than he would if that was just on a random Sunday when he was 0% owned and no one would even know who he is. So people are going to say, oh, he did this once already. He's going to be overowned relative to still being unpopular, but I have no interest in a guy that to me is just going to get zero.
Makes sense to me. Okay, one more for you. Mecole Hardman paired with the Chiefs D. Do you think that's going to be a popular strategy? The double dip never works. It's been talked about a lot in DFS circles, but he does return kicks and punts, I believe, right? So there's some added opportunity there. And, if he does return one, man, you're going to need that combo, right?
I like that. I mean, yes, again, we're saying things that are most likely not going to happen, but that's not what you're evaluating. You're evaluating if it does happen, how big of the potential payoff, relative to ownership, relative to leverage. That's a good one. The Chiefs defense is interesting on itself, especially if you think they can force Jimmy G, to throw more than say 20 times. I think that's kind of the barometer where the over under sits. You certainly want the Niners dropping back because, getting fumbles is not really ideal. You need sacks, you need turnovers. I don't mind that. It's a way to be very different, and those builds probably going to be pretty unique.
For sure. And then on the other side, Richie James, I just don't think it's all that viable. He is second in the league in kick returns, average 21, but and he does return punts as well. But the problem, of course, the big difference between Richie James and Mecole Hardman is that Richie James doesn't get any offensive snaps. He has his maximum is, he had 10 fantasy points in week 1, and that was about it for him. So I think that probably is a pretty poor strategy, and I can hear Austin in my head telling me not to do that. So
yeah.
Anything else you want to touch on for the Chiefs here in terms of offensive skill positions? Have we missed anyone?
No, I mean, I think, listen, at this point in the year, if you don't know by now who are the guys you haven't been paying attention, it's not a matter of that. It's more about lineup construction and how you see the game unfolding, as it always is. So nothing else to really say.
For sure. Let's talk about San Francisco. We have a little bit harder job breaking down San Francisco. Would you agree with that? Like, I feel like I have real trouble figuring out where this ball is going to go.
For sure. They're a chameleon. They're credit to them. I mean, I couldn't have been more wrong about their outlook for the season, but they have a chameleon-like quality that is Patriot-like, where sometimes they just run it. Jimmy G has shown that he can throw it. The defense comes alive. It is a very good unit. But teams like that are difficult to project because we don't know exactly how they're going to attack.
So we know that the Chiefs, the weakness of this Chiefs defense has been the running game. We talked about it a lot with Derrick Henry facing them last week. And early on, it actually looked like Henry was going to have his way. Yeah. I'm a little bit worried that, maybe the Chiefs have seen the 49ers rushing attack that, they went so heavy on the run 2 weeks ago against the Packers that maybe they're going to be throwing some wrinkles at them. But, the logical thing to do here would be just to attack via the ground, right?
Yeah. I mean, listen, I don't think there's a difference between, like you said, adding in some maybe new wrinkles and just going away from who you are. The Niners want to run the ball. I'm sure that they believe that they can run the ball on anyone, and it's very possible that they can. So that's what they're going to do. Now, the Chiefs, Chris Jones, that helped up front. But what really stopped Derrick Henry was Patrick Mahomes, to be honest. That's what happened in that game. If the Titans could have continued and made some stops, they could have kept going with that plan. It slowly unraveled. Tannehill got more involved, and we saw what happened. So I think really, in a way, it's the same story. If the Niners get punched first, it's really going to change their attack going forward. Whereas if they do what they did to the Packers, I don't think it's impossible that we see a replica of what Jimmy G puts out in terms of attempts and volume.
And you make a great point there. And that's why I think when you're constructing lineups, sometimes it really helps to do some hand building and think about the game script as it's going to play out, how you're building, right? So, what's the scenario where two 49ers running backs are in the top 6 plays of the day? Well, it's possible that the 49ers defense has probably had a good day. It's also probably highly correlated to the Chiefs passing attack because they're going to have to pass. There's a lot of different scenarios that you can kind of build, and I think maybe take a bit of an advantage by taking into account both correlation and game script, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's not going to play. It's puzzle pieces. We were talking actually before we went live about how Showdown it's a very fine line between trying to be unique and still trying to make sense. I guarantee I could be unique if I played Matt Moore and Chad Henne in a lineup. That would make actually no sense, and I'd be drawing dead, but I would be unique. On the flip side, I could build a very optimal lineup with Mahomes, goes right to the cap, and I'll have 5,000 dupes. That's also incredibly inefficient, and you're not going to get by doing that. Of course, we're trying to find the blend here and make that optimal type of lineup while still trying to limit your dupes.
And perhaps last year's Super Bowl is one great example of what you're talking about there, where we had this totally unique build of good players. And that's kind of one way to differentiate yourself. So I believe Julian Edelman was the captain. And then I'm not entirely sure, I don't have it in front of me, but standout offensive players were Sony Michel, Brandon Cooks, Robert Woods, the Patriots D, and no quarterback. So that's one of those unique things that you can do in large GPPs where the correlation is poor and it looks like a bad lineup on the surface. But there's definitely a chance that all of these guys are going to end up being in that top six without the quarterbacks factoring in.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there are certain plays in football that can really shake up showdown slates. I try to envision that when I build. First one is mobility at the QB position, because if the QB can run one in, that changes the whole way that you can build, because they're consuming, that's 9 points in terms if you have them at the captain for that touchdown, plus the yardage. That is a game changer. Whereas if they're unmobile, that if they're going to be the captain, you probably need 2 to 3 pass catchers and guys that they can target with them. I think at least, maybe if it was like Green Bay, Devontae Adams, where he throws to him 30 times, but that's neither here nor there. So that's one of the factors that I really consider is can that change the slate? And then, as you mentioned, is there ways where short, quick passes on a full point PPR site where the pass catchers can all get there without the quarterbacks particularly being in the lineup? That's another weird way to build, but it can be effective.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about these 49ers running backs. So we got Mostert, very expensive. Tevin Coleman getting almost no ownership right now. I'm guessing that we won't have a report on him. He was a limited participant in Wednesday's practice, but what are you doing with these guys? I feel like my mentality is going to be, if Tevin Coleman plays, I'm going to try and get overweight. We currently have been projected for almost no ownership, just basically based off of an ownership, just based off purely off ownership. And then if he doesn't play, I think I'm going to try and get overweight on Matt Breida, even though he really didn't see much of the ball last week, which was actually surprising given the amount of touches that he'd had in the lead up to last week. I still think there's a scenario where he gets 6 to 10 touches and Mostert isn't as effective as he was. And then the third guy that we have to consider, possible red zone vulture from last year, Jeff Wilson Jr. What's your approach to these 49ers running backs if Tevin Coleman's in and versus if he's out?
So yeah, I mean, I'll put it like this. I don't know if I've ever seen a cart come out for an arm injury. I did not think when that happened, I figured we weren't going to see him, but it's good to see him possibly being able to go. I'm a little different in the sense. So a couple things. I'm banking that, Mostert got going to the extent it was historic, basically. And I agree with you. If he was just running effectively, I think Breida would have took more of, I don't want to say it would have been a split, but he would have got more work. But Mostert was just in such a zone, they let him go to an extent. If Tevin Coleman is, if he's just got a Q tag and they have him as active, I'm going to go to Breida, because I do think there's a chance that Coleman is somewhat ineffective and Breida looks like the third string running back, but he's actually the second string running back. If Coleman sits, I totally get using Breida. The problem is the ownership is going to be way higher. So I think you can roll the dice if Coleman is kind of the wild card right now. We know Mostert's going to have the first crack at it, but you can go to Breida, I think, even if it's possible that he's the third string guy.
That's a really good point, actually, because if Coleman plays, that probably will lower Breida's ownership as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if he plays, there's a very real chance that he's limited, and Breida still could see those touches. Now, if Coleman sits, as you talked about, people are going to go to Breida. There's no doubt about it. He's the backup to Mostert. He's going to get a handful of touches, and he's viable. But man, when you're trying to separate, maybe you can sneak in Breida as a quote unquote backup running back when he looks like the third string.
Absolutely. Great points. Passing game. Let's let's finish off these 49ers with we'll talk about Manny Sanders, Deebo Samuel, Kendrick Bourne, Richie James, George Kittle, Ross Dwelly. Who you liking?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's an interesting spot for all these guys because if you look at the game logs, they've all been playing terrible because they haven't done anything, and that's not their fault. They've just been able to do it elsewhere. For me, and it's kind of just a gut feel, Emmanuel Sanders is someone I have pretty good interest in. Again, you can't look to the recent stats because these guys haven't been involved, but they've got Kittle, they've got Deebo. Sanders is kind of that next guy up. I think Jimmy G trusts him. He's certainly been in plenty of big games. Price is reasonable. Don't even mind him as a very dark horse captain. That opens up the salary. And if you do think, he could catch maybe a couple touchdowns, something like that, obviously that's lofty. I don't hate it, but I don't. It's hard to imagine Jimmy G throwing the ball 8 times again. I mean, the Vegas lines, and we're going to get into this tomorrow, have him around 20 passes. So just to give you an idea of what they're kind of projecting.
The other, that's the thing. And I was actually kind of shocked to see his ownership so high because I just assumed people would be so scared off. But,
Same.
It's a sharp community these days. And 6 for 8 and 77 yards is pretty quick to forget about that when that's such a huge outlier. One thing I do like about Deebo as well is he's been using the running game. We've seen him on some sweeps, I believe, last game. I think he had 2 rushes for about 40 yards or something like that. And so if you enter into one of these game scripts where the 49ers are just hammering the ball, he still might end up being viable and able to place in your lineups. And then I got one more flyer here. I don't know if you, what about Levine Toilolo? Little one catch, bootleg, touchdown catch for $200.
So he's kind of like the Blake Bell on the other side. I kind of think, you're drawing to maybe one target and you need to hope it's a red zone. Maybe, again, if you're going very aggressive, you're going to be forced into someone, but I just want to echo what you just said, because I think it's important. And I should have clarified this. I was saying one of the great, in my opinion, game changers is mobile QBs. The other game changer is receivers who could possibly get carries. And that's Tyreek Hill and Deebo, because if they score on a carry, there's such a less chance that the quarterback is needed in those lineups. I'm not saying it's not going to happen in the sense that Mahomes could still have an effective game and be part of it. But man, naturally when you think, okay, if this receiver scores, well, now the quarterback's got at least one passing touchdown. That's not necessarily the case with a guy like Deebo and a guy like Tyreek, and that can change the whole landscape of the entire slate.
Yeah, great point. You're taking that away from, like, sure, it could be a shootout. Garoppolo could have 4 touchdown passes and whoa, sorry, just pulled up something there. So like, but there is like an opportunity cost with that, right? And so every touchdown that's a rushing touchdown from receiver, you're taking some of those points away from the quarterback. So that's a great point as well. Before we move on, we'll talk a little kickers and defense here. Just want to thank you all for watching, and if you wouldn't mind hitting that like button, we greatly appreciate it. And I also want to remind you all of our Super Bowl show tomorrow. That kicks off at is that 12 Eastern?
Yes, sir. 12 Eastern.
12 Eastern.
Expect everybody. It's usually our betting show, so we know that the masses are always right there for the noon betting show. But now they'll have even more. The entire team will be ready to roll tomorrow at noon Eastern. Yes, sir.
Tell us a little bit about what we got going on for that show.
Yeah, I mean, so what we wanted to do, and I think this is the best way to approach it. The Super Bowl is such an event. There's so many factors. We really wanted to make a show that encompassed it all. So we're going to bring on guests that kind of specialize. We got Alex Baker talking Showdown. Who could be better? We've got Sal Vetri, myself, Lawfee. We're going to talk about betting. We've got props. We have just really everything covered. And we're just bringing on the entire team to give you little segments where we can have some fun and really break down the game as a whole.
Awesome. Can't wait, man. It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to hearing which prop bets I should make, which sport versus NFL bets to make. And, of course, the fun props, man.
Gatorade.
Whether or not we should be going over on the Demi Lovato anthem.
Well, don't worry, because I believe Spags and Josh Engelman will have you covered on that front. We've got literally everything covered.
Awesome. It's going to be great. All right. Before we wrap things up here, let's just talk a little bit about kickers and defense. Going through some of these showdown slates of the past year, I'm not seeing, what I am seeing is quite often one kicker or one defense is the most common scenario of a lot of these showdown slates, or one kicker and one defense on the same one. Not seeing a lot of two defenses, not seeing a lot of two kickers. How much are you going to be using kickers and defenses in this showdown slate? Is it still the bargain that it was to start the season? Have people caught on to the fact that kickers are generally a little bit underpriced? And how do you generally approach kickers and D in your showdown lineups?
So I do think people have caught on a bit. The first thing I think about is, all right, I try to conceptually grasp how many total points are going to be scored, not just, and I know this is very hard to do, not just points in the game, but fantasy points. There are some games where your kicker's 8 points is, say it's 5% of the total points. I'm just throwing out a number, but
Mm-hmm.
the higher that percentage is, the more important it is. Now, if you think this game flies over the total, well, naturally there's going to be a ton of receivers, a ton of backs, the quarterbacks, they're all going to be racking up points. Now you're 6 to 8 points, not so good. So I really try to think of it like that. Then you think about the red zone offenses. How often are you going to get the opportunities? Does the coach gamble? A kicker is a product of the coach. If you go for it every time on fourth down, you can't really get field goals. Not saying that's going to happen, but you do want to consider that, especially with Kansas City. Andy Reid trusts this offense as he should. I feel a little more comfortable with Robbie Gould out of the two kickers that we have to choose from.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the old field goal props here, but my page isn't loading. But the 54.5 total, there's got to be probably a less likelihood that we're going to see a field goal fest, right? Because
I don't think so.
yeah, the reality is that I don't think that, like, I have trouble envisioning the 49ers defense being able to fully stop the Kansas City passing attack. And I have trouble envisioning the Kansas City defense being able to stop the 49ers rushing attack. And this probably just is going to have a shootout written all over it. So do you have the thing is, though, of course, you don't necessarily need to, high point totals don't necessarily mean the defenses aren't in play. Would you be willing to take a flyer on either a bad pick from Jimmy G with this improved Kansas City secondary, or vice versa, the obviously better 49ers defense going up against I think a pretty decent pass protection line in the Kansas City Chiefs, but there's still that possibility with those game breakers on that front in that front seven for the 49ers able to take Mahomes down.
Both defenses definitely, you can make a case for different ways. As you mentioned, the Niners are just an incredible unit. They can get pressure with their front four. They have as tough a matchup as you're going to have, though. Mahomes really does such a better job than I thought he would at not turning the ball over. And then on the other side, the Chiefs, they got to get the opportunities. I feel very comfortable with Kansas City's defense if Jimmy G throws the ball a significant amount. But if he throws the ball 12 times, it's really hard to think that the Chiefs defense is doing what they need to do, because that probably means that the Niners ran the ball 50 times. That's a really bad sign if you're rostering the Chiefs defense.
Very good points. Final thoughts before we wrap things up. Do you want to give any general advice on showdown lineups, how people should approach? You probably covered a lot of it, but maybe there's a few tidbits there that you left out.
I think one thing is this is the Super Bowl. So even though we've been playing Showdown the entire year, I would venture to say there will be more casuals than usual. So just the simple things that we know. Yeah, exactly. There's going to be some soft money, little things that we already know. Just try to make sure that you cover those bases. And that's, you probably shouldn't be building to straight 50K. You want to try to tell that story, make sure the lineup flows. And of course, as we always advocate, lean on our projections, the ownership, try to get a sense of what we're doing and how the slate's going to play out. And then you try to make your stand with how you think the game is going to go. That's really what I'd advocate. And of course, tomorrow, when we have Alex on the show, dive into that and really try to formulate a strategy to take one down.
That sounds like a good plan. Make sure to tune in and check out what Alex has to say for sure. I think he's live from the Super Bowl, so we can be a little bit jealous of him in Miami. We got a lot of great content coming up today as well on the Awesemo YouTube channel. Jake Hari with the NHL Strategy Show coming up. NBA, we have Deeper Dive Live Before Lock with Adam, Lofty, Sal, Spags. So they're going to be breaking down the NBA slate tonight. And of course, on Super Bowl morning, we have Sal Vetri and EMAC going to be talking a little bit of NFL Super Bowl action right before our new Sunday NBA strategy show with Sal Vetri and Josh Engelman. So lots of exciting stuff coming up. Of course, feel free to hit up Ben or I in Slack chat if you're a premium member. And if you could like this video on your way out, we greatly appreciate it. It helps us keep everything free. So thanks so much for tuning in. I guess this is it for us, man. I'll see you next August when we start our previews. And it's crazy to think that this is the last we'll be talking football.
It's been a good run, but yeah, now stay tuned. We'll have plenty of things, and I'll still wrangle you for the betting show all summer. Don't you worry.
I like it. We'll talk golf.
All right. Good luck, everyone. Talk soon.